live stream on YouTube too. This is expertise I wish I didn't have to figure out how to make all this work. All right. Let's see here. Okay, I think we're here. I think we're on. All right. Hi, everyone. Well, welcome to our first big event of this semester, the start and stop and start semester. It's real now. We're happy. We're here. We're having events. And I'm especially pleased to be able, I mean, I'm not pleased that we are virtual, but I am pleased to be able to take advantage of this format and continue our series, Architecture at Chicago Somewhere Else, where we flip the script a little bit. You know, when we bring people in person, we get the person, but not the context and the space and the way, yeah, just the kind of insight that you get from imagining yourself somewhere else. And so while we will not be virtual forever, we are grateful to rely on the generous friends and colleagues to let us into their spaces and their ways of thinking. I think that's really the point, to kind of see things from another angle. And tonight we imagine ourselves in New York City with Jen Wood and Emanuel Admassu of AdWo. I will give a little bit of introduction to kind of open the talk, but just also to say that this, you know, we don't conceive these as typical lectures. This is a kind of format that I write to people and I say, what can we do to make this something that takes advantage of this unique and strange moment of connection that we have? So, but yeah, so I mean, AdWo came on our radar first through an essay that Emanuel wrote in Flat Out 3 a few years ago in 2018. And I see Penelope, the editor of our very own Flat Out magazine here, where he played the role of the talent agent, which is someone who seeks out and calls attention to things that we should be knowing about, we should be looking at, really, yeah, from, again, other angles or other geographies. And it was especially memorable because it had the conceit of a tennis match, a kind of patron architect tennis match played by Haile Selassie and the architect Arturo Mezzadini, that addressed really all kinds of issues that were sharp and relevant then, but I think are even continuing to be more so, issues of patronage and dynamics of power and creativity and colonialism and intercultural exchange. And so I encourage everybody to find Flat Out issue 3. If you don't have it, ask me about it. I can make sure you get a copy. But yeah, I think that again, that other angle, that way of thinking was another reason why I wanted to reach out to AdWo for this kind of event. In the meantime, they have relocated from Providence to New York City, but as their bio lists, they also kind of operate in extension between Melbourne and Addis Ababa. They aim to establish an operational terrain between architecture's content and container, equally committed to designing buildings and reimagining their dynamic social political context. I think it's a super strong statement. So I just read the copy from their website. They've undertaken projects in Ethiopia, Tanzania, South Korea, Germany, and the United States. Recently, their work was exhibited at the Museum of Modern Art in the exhibition Reconstructions, Architecture and Blackness in America. And also it's been shown at Studio Museum in Harlem and the Architecture Museum of TU München and Art Omi. And I'll just say also a couple of rules of the game, I guess, for tonight that they can underline, but that Emanuel and Jen shared with me in advance, which is really a presentation system that is randomized. And so they're not going to go back. They're not going to, it's about making connections kind of live. And so if you have a question, even a half-formed thought, Jen said before we started now, just jump into the chat. I'll read it out loud, jump in, you know, if you're shy, but don't be shy, just jump in, you know, into out loud and just interrupt us. But I'll keep an eye on the chat both here and on YouTube to insert any questions, and yeah, they'll speak for a little while and have maybe a little Q&A at the end. So those are the terms. I got really excited for this, and I ask everybody to join me in welcoming Emanuel and Jen.
Thank you guys for having us. Yeah, so when we received the email from Jane, we took the prompt very seriously. So it's not a lecture, but the way our website is set up currently, there's a gallery function on our website, and WSDIA, along with Eric Price, when they programmed the website, the gallery side is basically a diptych with a set of images that are randomized. So we're going to just scroll through. We don't know what image is coming up, and we don't know what types of connections there might or might not be.
They could be from the same project, but more likely not. We can't go back. And yeah, this is totally unplanned. So yeah, please interrupt us as we go through this.
Yeah. It's meant to be very informal. Okay. So this is the website, and you guys can kind of follow along, but I have a feeling that what you see will be very different than what we're seeing. So in the gallery function, when you come in here, it basically starts producing these diptychs. So because we're sharing screen, we won't be able to see everyone. So if you have any questions, just jump in, or maybe Jane will jump in and read the questions. What's the best way to do that?
I'm happy to read the questions, or I mean, really, yeah, don't be shy, anybody. But we're casual. That's the idea. But yeah, I'm happy to, if anybody wants to put them in the chat, I'll be looking.
Cool. All right, so yeah, let's start. Jen, you wanna...
Yeah, so this is 2 images from the same project. The one on the left is from the very beginning of the research we did for immeasurability, the exhibition that was part of a group show at MoMA. And what you're seeing are Mars dunes. And so from a very early stage, we're thinking about this idea of a material that evoked the sense of instability, like non-fixity. And so you can see how that actually ended up the sculpture on the right. The scene that you see on top of the cone is actually all sort of clad in black magnetite sand. And so you can sort of see this follow through of the material study from the very beginning to the very end of the project.
Here, similar situation, but on the right, again, was an initial collage that we were doing with black sand on the disc. And on the left was a quick project that we did focusing on material translations. And we were looking at these ancient tombs in China where the underground architecture was basically a material translation of the wooden architecture above ground. So whatever existed above ground was translated to brick to house people after they pass away below ground. So we reinterpreted that within the New England context and took the typical typology, which is a salt box house, and started reimagining the details through brick.
So this is a queen girt, typical New England wood detail that is translated into brick. Here on the left, this is a photograph of Mercato in Addis Ababa at about 7 a.m. in the morning. So part of our 2 markets project, which is about 2 markets, one in Addis Ababa and the other in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. It involved a lot of time spent at each of these markets. So this is on one of the many tours we took of the market in the early morning. And on the right is a study model of a table that we produced for an office space in Providence.
On the left is a pair of homes that we designed for siblings who were returning back to Addis Ababa to build a house next to their fathers in a compound. And we kind of came up with this simple landscape strategy that united the different architectural elements in the compound. And on the right was a series of studies where we were thinking about the unitization of land and the measurability of land as it relates to race. And we were again playing around with black sand to dissolve these boundaries. So on the right is a measurability, and on the left is a house in Addis.
On the right is a drawing that preceded a tapestry that we produced for measurability. So this is a small portion of the ocean floor under the Atlantic Ocean. And on the left, I guess both images are about the ocean in a certain way. The image on the left is a building in Karaoke Market in Dar es Salaam. And I'm not sure if you can notice like the filigree metalwork on the balconies of the building. So this metalwork is directly referencing architecture of Goa. There's a huge population of South Asian people in Dar es Salaam.
Yeah, and a lot of the architecture is really formed out of this hybridity between South Asia and East Africa.
Did you want to jump in?
All right, on the left is an initial kind of study model of the cone that we produced for immeasurability. And on the right is the table that Jen mentioned. It's kind of a circular table, 1/4 inch metal, and it was surrounded by this large quilted curtain that we designed.
There seems to be a lot of black circles in our work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if I can draw a connection between these two, but the image on the right is an installation view of our 2 markets research. Large format drawings printed on aluminum and backed with polished corrugated aluminum. So as you move through the gallery, the colors of the drawings kind of dynamically reflect around you. And the image on the left is an overview of a house that we designed in a suburb in Addis Ababa, which is about kind of pulling and pushing on the compound wall, which is typical for all single family homes in Addis, and kind of instrumentalizing that so that it actually forms part of the enclosure of the house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as we were developing the drawings for 2 markets, we were also drawing the actual characters that occupy the space. And we produced a series of these characters about each one of the markets. And that begins to reflect the actual texture and clothing that people wear in both places. So on the left is one of those characters, and on the right is that metal table right outside of the shop of the metal worker in Providence.
So the image on the right is a detail of a tapestry that was produced for TU München. This is not a refugee camp exhibition curated by Empo Matsipa, and it was about the ephemerality of marketplaces, the marketplace of Mercato and Addis specifically. The image on the left, similar ideas. However, this is a street shot of the Karaoke Market in Dar es Salaam, and you can see how the fixed architecture of the buildings is totally engulfed by the day trading of the marketplace at the street level.
Yeah, these are both images from the same project. Again, a set of studies really thinking about the kind of surreal aspects of the suburban context in Atlanta, Georgia. And we were really interested in the woods that surround Atlanta, but also these brief moments where everyday piece of architecture like a gas station or a fast food restaurant begins to appear within the clearing. And on the right was a collage that we produced with this magnetic black sand that we were really obsessed with, called Magnetite, and juxtaposing that with images of Freaknik, which was a yearly event that took place in Atlanta, where a group of students from HBCUs would gather for a week, and the picnic kind of became a street party. And the traffic jam was really an opportunity to reimagine the city of Atlanta.
And on the left is, again, some initial material studies for immeasurability. We're working with the glass department at RISD, and it was kind of like a several month-long science experiment where we mixed together a bunch of different sand types. And the image on the right is a view of Anwar Mosque in Mercato in Addis very early in the morning, and it's kind of hidden in the middle of the block. You can't see it from the street except from certain vantage points, and the perimeter of the block is again a bunch of market stalls. So it's kind of about this, the market is kind of anchored by these really sort of monumental sites of congregation and worship. Yeah.
These are both images of immeasurability. On the left is a detail of the cone with these everyday spaces covered in black sand. And on the right is kind of an overall shot. We basically produced these two large collages to anchor the corner and the gallery. And the tapestry was suspended between those. And in front was the cone that had fragments of these everyday spaces in Atlanta.
On the right is a mock-up of the corrugated panels that I was speaking about earlier for the exhibition in Providence. And then on the left, you can sort of see at the edge of the curtain, you can see that it's a reflective material on the outside. So this is the conference space that we mentioned before. On the interior of that quilted curtain is canvas. And then on the outside, we use this thermal barrier material. So I guess in both of these projects, we're interested in how, these materials are transformed as you move through the space, and they picked up the colors of the space as you move through them.
Mm-hmm. So on the left is kind of an installation view of two markets with the corrugated panels. And on the right is kind of a recent project that we're developing. It's a furniture piece that we are calling Thick Rug. It's somewhere between a coffee table and a rug. And it's basically these thick woven pieces that you can obviously work on, but you can potentially lay on. It's kind of a furniture piece in some ways designed for the pandemic.
The figure on the left is of a woman in the karaoke market. Excuse me. We thought a lot about how we should represent people. I think there's been a lot of discussion recently on how architects draw people. And so, we decided that the best thing to do was create our own kind of sort of family of people to use in the drawings, except it was important for us that they had a certain level of abstraction.
But we're also looking at the work of artists like Audubon and Kanga who have ways of kind of engaging with bodies in space. So as we were drawing the bodies, we were also drawing the urban condition and the architecture. So the two were in a way being developed simultaneously.
You can sort of see in this photo on the right, but this model is actually populated by thousands of little tiny people as well. And we actually spent a lot of time to make sure that the models that we were downloading actually looked like the people that were occupying these spaces. So that's like an ongoing pursuit of our practice, is like how we draw people.
On the left is an elevation of that table that we mentioned earlier, and on the right is kind of a diagram of that compound house that we designed, which is basically a series of shifting volumes. And it works against the typical typology of a compound, which is a house surrounded by a garden. But in this case, we decided to divide up the house into 5 volumes, and each one of the volumes had their own garden. So you enter into these different ecologies as you move through the program.
These are both photographs of Mercator in Addis Ababa. On the right, you can see this kind of what I think is quite beautiful kind of scaffolding. It's made from eucalyptus, so it's kind of a slightly irregular grid that is clad in this is tarpaulin, and orange and blue are the two colors that are used throughout. Most of Addis is under construction. And then on the image on the left is it's a view of a typical morning from one of the malls in Mercato, looking down at the street scene below.
Yeah. And what's interesting about both of these images, at least for us, is the various ways in which, the Cartesian grid somehow destabilized or compromised. So the street is always kind of occupied with a series of cars that are parked, in multiple orientations. And similarly, the grid that is supposed to contain the scaffolding is always somehow slightly off center.
Yeah, I guess it might not seem obvious, except I think the image on the right is kind of definitely in similar thinking to what's happening on the left. The image on the left is a drawing that we produced for 2 markets, and we didn't want to use any line work. It was all fills, it's all fills and hatches. And I think the image on the right is an extension of that thinking. For immeasurability, this project was about sort of challenging this idea of this default sort of understanding that we all live in quantifiable units, and understanding land as like something allotted and owned. And so we applied this grain filter to our collages to kind of challenge that idea of like fixity.
I have a question from YouTube.
Yeah.
From our very own Stuart Hicks, who is now a YouTube sensation. So he, I guess, lives on YouTube and doesn't join us on the Zoom. But I think, I was just periodically checking, and of course we can't go back, but he's asking the question, what is the relationship of the kind of characters you're drawing, the figures, to the design process?
Well, in the marketplace research, it's mostly a research project. It's not really a design project. So I'm sure that work influences the design projects that we produce in the studio, but the link is never explicit. So we're really trying to learn from the virtues of the marketplace and trying to develop ways of drawing and representing that space as something that is temporal, but in some ways is almost anti-architectural. It's usually these ephemeral forms of occupation on the street, or the signage systems, or the merchandise that defines one's experience through that space. And the architecture becomes secondary to those things. And I think that does influence a lot of our thinking when we do design work, but it's not a direct link, I would say.
Yeah, to sort of continue on with that, like I think the drawing on the left kind of illustrates this, that I think we ended up at a point where the black ephemeral objects at the bottom of the page and the people, like we sort of ended on a point where this was actually the architecture of the market, and everything behind it, this strange mishmash of influences from around the world, was kind of like a surreal backdrop to what was happening at the street level.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yeah, I think we addressed the image on the right already, but the image on the left was actually the construction site for a project we designed. It ended up not being built, but it's an apartment building called Ayat, and that was going to be the site. It was actually a series of autonomous lots, 3 of them, that the owner was trying to combine and build one large apartment building.
What you can see is this corrugated metal, which is like ubiquitous, throughout Addis, and that is why we wanted to use that material in the 2 markets exhibition. That, but kind of transforming it, making it super reflective, so it has a transformative kind of function in the gallery space as well. Oops, sorry.
The image on the left is a project that we did.
Sorry. I'm interrupting.
Please.
First of all, I got a text from Stuart that says he hates me. So Stuart, I apologize publicly. Second of all, what is the black cone made of? Is a question we have in the chat.
Which black cone? The one at the measurability project. The black cone is actually made from fiberglass, and it has it has steel conical legs.
Ribs also.
It has steel ribs on the inside.
Yeah.
The top is actually black glass, and then on top of the glass is loose shifting sand that is moved around by magnetized robots underneath the glass, and then the sort of scene is made from 3D printed nylon that has each been painted with glue and black sand.
Oh, yeah.
But please interrupt as much as you want. Yeah, so the project on the left, we were shortlisted, but we didn't win the Flatiron Public Plaza installation. And again, we did another black cone.
We did get another project out of this though, so.
Yeah. And so it was this large scale kind of cone that you can actually get into. And once you enter into the cone, you basically enter into a space that had an undercroft of faceted golden roof. Ceiling. And we created these cracks in between that basically reveal the lighting underneath, and the cone is sitting on 3 large boulders of granite. And on the right is the table that we mentioned earlier.
On the right is another translation of a New England timber construction detail, which is a half-lapped rafter joint, again in brick. And the image on the left is also an image of translation. So this is the Carriacou Market Hall designed by Beda Amuli. And he was referencing in the past, in pre-colonial Tanzania, markets were held underneath massive palm trees. So the building that you see here is actually a series of very large concrete funnels that are meant to speak to this idea of being under a huge canopy. And
they're also water collectors.
They collect water and they passively cool the space underneath.
Yeah, I mean, we're really obsessed with this building also because it marks a particular moment of post-colonial optimism on the continent. And he was really designing this project to go along with a particular political philosophy, which was called Ujamaa, which means familyhood. And a lot of this kind of collective thinking came out of, this brief moment post-liberation where people were really optimistic about regaining kind of control of their nation state.
And it's still the center, it's still the heart of the market today.
On the left is another piece of furniture that we designed. This one is called Moonbug. It's kind of like a coffee table, I would say. Mm-hmm. And on the right is the compound house that we mentioned earlier, an old airport with a series of gardens.
Yeah, I feel like there's a nice connection between these two images. The one on the right is an unrolled elevation of an apartment building we're doing in Addis. So you can see the brick outer facade, and then set inboard from that is the facade of the building proper, the enclosure, which you can see in green. So the brick exterior facade is playing on this idea of the compound wall that we were talking about earlier. It's actually just the giant extrusion of the site boundaries. So we got it through planning, arguing that it was just a very tall fence. And we have punched it with a series of irregular openings. And
on the roof is kind of a collective space garden.
And then on the left, again, is like a detail of that quilted curtain that we made. The fabricator of the curtain we should mention is Priscilla Carrion, who's a very talented textile artist.
Someone is asking in the chat the name of the market building, the optimist, post-colonial optimism one, which I think is good to,
The Carriacou Market Hall.
Carriacou Market Hall.
Kariakoo. And it's by Beta Amuli, the architect.
Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful building. I mean, it was severely damaged about a year ago with fires, but I think they're restoring it.
Thank you.
Yeah, so on the left is another character from the market, and on the right is a fragment from the scenes that we were producing for the cone in immeasurability. But what was interesting about the image on the right is while the show was happening, I was also doing a series of events with the Black Reconstruction Collective. We were kind of touring all of the schools and giving a talk. And for those talks, we were producing these brief 5-minute videos. And this is one of the renderings that we produced for a short video, one of those talks.
The drawing on the right is a plan oblique view of the Carriacou Market Hall and how the ground is activated around it. The image on the left is a street view of the Flatiron project. I can't find a thing connecting that to you right now.
Yeah, on the left is these two buildings in the middle of Mercato that are very interesting because it's similar to the Carriacou Market Hall, but in this case, they were built by the Emperor Haile Selassie, and they were kind of meant to be the anchors of the marketplace. But currently, there's this large concrete piece of infrastructure that is being built right in between them as a bus depot. And that bus depot is part of a larger network of transportation infrastructure that is almost exclusively being built by the Chinese government, including the light rail system that you see on the bottom, but also the dam that you see on the top. So we're really interested in the ongoing kind of influence that the Chinese government has on African urbanism. And this was a drawing kind of thinking about that. And on the right is another one of those studies of the Waffle House within the swamp or the forest in the south.
So the text you can see on the left in the drawing, I believe, is the Chinese-owned CGCOC group. So you see that kind of signage throughout the marketplace and actually throughout Addis, kind of announcing what new piece of infrastructure is going to be built.
And it's also, I think, it's the largest construction company in the world.
Which is, all part of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative agendas.
I have a question. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
I just missed it before you guys.
Oh, sorry, we got to pause a bit.
Yeah.
It's okay. I was like trying to, not be rude and just like talk over.
Be rude,
please. Yeah. We have a toddler. We're like totally used to it.
I just have a question about the kind of representation of your project. So in some of the projects that we're looking at, there's very kind of like vibrant colors, the fills and with the characters as well. And then in some of the other projects, it's much more kind of shadowy, saturated with like the sand. And so I'm just wondering if you guys find that as you're working through a project that it takes on a certain kind of sensibility as you go, or is it that certain modes of like drawing or modeling that they take on kind of different ways of representing things just based on their mediums?
I would say it's the first, and the fact that I think, both of those to a certain extent are research projects. And as we develop the research, the project really begins to gain its own ambiance. And that ends up determining the decisions we make in representation. for example, with the market research, we became more and more interested in just the kind of intensity of color that exists in both marketplaces, both on the buildings, but also the merchandise. But in the context of the research on Atlanta, it was a research project that was really thinking about architecture and Blackness. So we were really thinking about the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which you see an image of on the left, which is this space on the Atlantic Ocean that was a prominent space for the transition during the Middle Passage of West Africans being enslaved and moved to the Americas. So that really framed the ambiance for the work. And a lot of the representation was meditating on the Mid-Atlantic Ridge and the black sand that covers it. So yeah, I would say the ambiance for the representation comes from the research, but also a lot of the work is in some ways critiquing what happened before it. So I would say the representation for immeasurability in some ways was a critique of some of the things that we did with two markets.
I feel like similar references pop up for us across projects. For example, we often come back to the series called The Blue Devils by Chris O'Feely. And if you're not familiar with the work, it's a series of large format paintings that are painted in blacks and extremely dark blues with sort of silver mixed into the paint. So when you're standing in front of a painting, you can't see everything in the painting. You have to sort of keep shifting your body in order to sort of see another portion. So we're very interested in the idea of like legibility and registration and proximity to the work. And I think that became a really important precedent for the black sand piece, where from a distance, it just kind of looks like a haze. But then as you get closer, the cone disappears and then you're really able to sort of understand or take notice of the details of how these sites are activated by people.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, but also a lot of the work is really trying to play with notation, and not notational systems that architects typically use, but notational systems from the visual arts. So the tapestry on the left, as you can see, I mean, we were exploring and thinking about different forms of surveillance and also how those play out as they relate to the diaspora. And yeah, all of these things are kind of being considered as we produce these images.
What was the name of the painting that you mentioned with the blues and I wanted to look it up.
It's a series called The Blue Devils by Chris O'Feely, O-F-I-L-I.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, on the right is those gardens and the compound house in Old Airport that we mentioned earlier.
This is also an image. I feel like I really like this image on the left, and Emanuel isn't so into it, but it's a mashup, obviously, of the gas station, but in the background is a scene taken from an episode of Atlanta called The Woods, which is also really important for our research. It's just as a very brief overview, it's the protagonist kind of gets lost in the woods and a bunch of surreal, spooky stuff happens to him, and it's really frightening, but it's also a kind of transformative moment where he can escape again as a different person. That was a terrible sort of summary, but you should definitely watch it. But it was basically about how the woods have this eerie cinematic quality in Atlanta. And we really wanted to capture that in our project. And then the Cheshire Cat and how that functions in the story of Alice in Wonderland. It's kind of unclear whether, it's sinister or helpful, a friend, or leading Alice astray. So that's why I like it.
And on the right is a detail of those bricks with these everyday spaces in Atlanta.
The question in the chat, Zara is curious about the compound type house. Normally compound, as I understand it from a South Asian context, is a cluster of dwellings enclosed by a wall. Here you're manipulating just volumes. Could you define it in your specific context? What issues of lifestyle are at stake in reimagining the compound type?
Yeah, that's a great question. So definitely in the South Asian context, but also most of the African continent, I would say the compound house is probably the most dominant residential typology.
But it's usually single family, right?
But it's usually single family in Addis, although there are some compound homes that would have multiple dwellings within them. But in the projects that we've been working on, they've all been single family dwellings that are now needing to densify. So we've always been interested in the fact that the outdoor spaces are used just as frequently as the indoor spaces, but also because of the mild climate in Ethiopia year round. So we've been doing a series of these projects that basically equalize indoor and outdoor spaces. And a lot of that is done by removing the hierarchy that is established between the house in the center and the garden in the perimeter. So the apartment building that we showed the unfolded elevation of is kind of a play on that. We did another project called Ayat Apartments, which is also thinking about this indoor-outdoor relationship. And and the Old Airport project is similar in that sense.
Mm-hmm. And just to provide a little bit more detail, like when Emanuel said they need to densify, that's actually stipulated by the government. The people who own single family homes in certain areas must develop them into multifamily sort of developments. Otherwise, they risk having their property confiscated.
Yeah. And I mean, this is also kind of a logistical problem and the fact that the population in Ethiopia has virtually doubled in my lifetime, from around 50 million to now over 100 million. So on the left is the apartment building that I just mentioned, where we're basically multiplying these gardens vertically. And on the right is a fragment of one of the gardens in Old Airport.
Here,
you can skip
we might skip this one.
And this is that building on the left.
So you can see in the foreground and a little bit in the background, a kind of a typical street scene, a really high, often rendered concrete block fence with a lush garden behind it.
Should we stop here? Has it been 30 minutes? We can stop here and scroll through with you guys asking questions. Prefer.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. I'm sure there are questions from people too hesitant to jump in. So now, by all means, it's your chance. Can you type the name of the market? I will do that, Jeff. Yeah, I wrote it down, so I will do that. Maybe I'll ask a question myself, just based on I didn't know when I was thinking back on the tennis match and the pairing, the doubles, and now we have the doubles here also, and this kind of pairing duality. But I'm wondering, in a kind of practical way, how you set the terms of what you include in the pool of images that you're drawing from here. And then also, maybe just a little bit more about why this pairing, other than setting up a nice format for impromptu casual lecture.
Well, maybe I'll start at the end. I feel like, as you could probably tell, like I feel like by pairing these two images together, it constantly destabilizes, our understanding of what we have produced as well. So it's kind of working against this idea of like a single image can capture the whole story of a place or an idea. And so by constantly switching up these pairings, we might understand something new or think about something in a new way.
Yeah.
And then in terms of what makes it into the pool, we kind of take it in terms of like the images that we like best. And when Emanuel is working on the website, he might delete some stuff that I've added and vice versa. So it's kind of a bit of a tug of war and what makes it in there. But it is a constantly changing pool of ideas and thoughts.
Yeah, but there's also, I mean, a two-ness to our practice, obviously. And we're two very different people who come from two very different places. So all of our projects end up being somehow negotiations between our sensibilities. And as we were conceptualizing the website, this was one of the things that we really wanted to push, the tension between our approaches, and how that tension is really what produces the work.
Which is why the website is both in English and in Amharic, like not wanting to sort of subdue the dominance of like English discourse, I mean, architectural discourse, and hopefully connecting with some people where Emanuel is from too.
Thank you. Yeah. Just one other question so far in the chat. How do you approach material choices in your practice? Do you do many material research studies? I mean, I know you mentioned the one with the different soil and stuff, or the, kind of.
Glass, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, how do we start?
I mean, it always depends on the context, obviously. And for example, that apartment building that is currently under construction in Addis Ababa, we were really interested in the single family villas that are currently being demolished. So we wanted to be able to use the brick from those homes for the facade. So that was kind of a driving concept from the beginning. But there have been other projects where a particular aesthetic interest ends up driving the material decision. But somehow it's a negotiation between what is available locally and what we're trying to achieve aesthetically with the project.
Yeah, so it's kind of like three different things. Like one is sometimes a direct reference from site, like the brick building. And one is like finding an apt sort of metaphorical kind of material to describe a concept that we're working through. And then a third would be a material as a counterpoint to what we're trying to say as well, like an inversion of ideas that we're working on. For example, the transformation of like brick structures into, of wood details into brick.
You want us to keep talking?
Well, that's the thing. It's
this is the Zoom kind of.
I know. Well, and it's also, I mean, it's just been nice to have these images wash over, kind of these waves of the projects coming and resurfacing again. But I know other people out there have questions.
Yeah, we can just scroll through as well. We don't need to talk about all of them. Yeah, this image on the right is a large installation that we're developing. Can you say more? Somewhere in upstate New York. And yeah, it's kind of, we've been really interested in tapestry. So we've been trying to find ways to reproduce tapestries, either through particular facade expressions, which you saw with the Bole Rwanda project. But in this case, we're trying to find ways to collaborate with stonemasons to actually develop a drawing on the ground. And this is a project that we hope will be completed this year.
Judith asks in the chat, along with Chris O'Feely, who are some of the other visual artists and practices at which you're looking?
Well, Audubon and Kanga, who Emanuel mentioned before.
Ida Molina, Ezra Bube. I mean, there's it's a long list.
Arthur Jafer.
Yeah.
It is long.
David Hammonds. I mean, there's a lot.
Talk crazy Dyson.
Oh yeah, on the right is the undercroft of the Flatiron project. And here on the right is probably one of the first images that we produced for measurability, where we were really thinking about the unitization of land, as Jen mentioned earlier, and how particular spatial practices begin to dissolve those units. And this became kind of a reference image as we continue to produce both the models, the tapestry, and the collages.
Here's another question. Noticing the sizable difference in scale of the projects, do you generally approach a large project with the same mindset as a smaller scale project?
It feels like with larger projects, there are more stakeholders. So I feel like having more voices at the start of the project ultimately makes it kind of very different. Whereas I feel these smaller projects for, artifacts for exhibitions, they are generally us running wild with an idea, without much sort of exterior influence outside of our own research and looking for precedents. So,
but also, I mean, sometimes for us, the scale of the project is also determined by how much time we spent doing it. And the marketplace research is probably the longest running project in our practice. And we've been working on that for close to 10 years now. So that has created a series of collaborations with folks in both cities. And that's something that is still evolving. And sometimes it's producing tapestries, sometimes it's producing essays or artifacts, but it's an ongoing engagement with the marketplace that is really influencing a lot of the design work, but also the writing.
Right. So the project scale actually there's very different understandings of project scale, like there's the physical sort of building versus the table, or it could be, a really big project for us probably has quite a small physical footprint, but for us it has led to so many other experiments and people and other projects. So that is for us as a large scale project.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, this is the building that we mentioned earlier with the construction site.
With the corrugated fence.
With the corrugated fence, yeah. Sorry, I feel like I didn't answer the compound house question well, but it's been a typology that we're really thinking about as the city continues to densify. Because even though people are moving into these apartments, they want to maintain the aura of the compound house because there's kind of a certain cultural attachment to what that means. So these experiments are really trying to find ways to multiply the compound house vertically.
Could I just jump in here and ask something? Or maybe
Yes,
offer an
please.
observation. Thank you so much. Really beautiful presentation. What struck me is, for example, in the market project and then in some of the photography, the work's really operating in the realm of, like documentation or like documentary representation, let's say. But it seems like you're approaching the documentary from totally different directions. So for example, in the market documentation, which I did see at RISD and thought was just incredibly beautiful, exquisite exhibition, it seems to me there the documentation, the drawings are about making the real more vivid or more vivid and more abstract, in the sense that the drawings are incredibly precise and rigorous and detailed. And then on the other hand, with the photography and the SO examples, it's like the documentation is going toward a kind of clouding of the real, or making it more vague, prescriptively vague. And so it's sort of destabilizing the real. That's just something I see in the work. Do you think you're doing that, or have I misunderstood?
No, I think that's very, very accurate. I mean, that's kind of what we were hinting at earlier, where with the Two Markets project, we were really obsessed with measuring the market, which is almost impossible to measure. And a lot of the work that we ended up developing for immeasurability was a reaction against that pretension, you know? And with immeasurability, it was really kind of trying to lean into the realm of doubt and trying to find ways to represent, you know, these spaces and kind of forms of spatial occupation that architectural representation almost always fails to account for. So yeah, your observation is very accurate.
But then with the photography, it becomes very surreal, and so the real becomes, more vague, or one can interpret it multiple ways. I mean, I just find that very interesting to like think through how one documents the real and what the role of representation is for different kinds of realities. You know, I mean, maybe this is sort of building on what Abby was asking you earlier about representation. Like, when does one need to obscure the real, and when does one need to make the real hyper measured, maybe? How do you make those decisions?
Well, I think like with the drawings in Two Markets, it was like our first attempt to draw a site or a space or a building from multiple vantage points. And I think it was maybe successful to a pretty limited degree. An essay that was really important to us was Togethering, is that what it's called, by Anuradha Siddiqui? Writing With, and it's by Anuradha Siddiqui, and she kind of, the essay is fantastic, but there's some really pertinent concept in there for us, kind of about how can we think about architecture from multiple vantage points, and how do we sort of destabilize like the authority of the singular vantage point, because that in itself is a fiction as well, right? Like it's so I think that is a kind of an impossible task that we've been trying to develop as we have taken upon these new projects.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that too, just the ethical implications of us being positioned here, in New York City, for example, and then going and documenting Dar es Salaam or Addis Ababa. So a lot of Two Markets was really grappling with that positionality. And with immeasurability, it was kind of our own frustration with architecture, really. And in that case, of course, it was about Blackness in architecture. So all of the spaces occupied by Black people in the city that are devalued, unaccounted for. So as we engaged with, especially with popular culture coming out of Atlanta, it was clear that people were producing images that were somewhat surreal as a reaction against the banality of the suburb, and that's how we started producing those images of the woods, for example, with the Waffle House sign. And those became experiments of what are the cultural signifiers that take a normative kind of everyday environment and make it an environment that is supposed to signify Blackness, you know. In Atlanta, Waffle House is associated with Black culture because it's assumed that that's the place you go to after the nightclub. And we wanted to make these types of oblique suggestions without necessarily being explicit.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, we sort of touched upon this before, that this is not this is strategies meant to be in conversation with modes of representation that have come before us. Like, for example, if you look at music videos by Outkast, for example, I mean, there are plenty of examples of the TV show Atlanta by Donald Glover. There are plenty of examples of how weird the suburbs can be, and like the beautiful sort of cultural sort of artifacts, like the music and movies that come out of that often marginalized space.
Thank you.
And Sarah has another question, a question about the prominence of the Anwar Mosque minaret at the heart of the market project. Are you seeking to comment at all or otherwise think of ways to blur the religious and the secular?
Yeah, I mean, the best way to think about the drawings for two markets is actually through a series of narratives that we thought were instrumental to, you know, the way the markets are understood or valued today. And Anwar Mosque, in the context of Admassu, is really important for the simple fact that it shares a boundary wall with one of the largest churches in the city. And it was actually kind of part of a colonial master plan that was juxtaposing the two larger religious institutions next to each other, hoping to create enough friction. But the two religious institutions have managed to coexist over the past 80 years with no issues. In addition to that, because, you know, obviously the land value in these marketplaces is skyrocketing. So both the church and the mosque are, in a way, thickening their boundaries with these shops that are being rented at very, very high prices. So the shops are actually beginning to encroach upon the outdoor spaces of both the mosque and the church. So the short answer is yes.
Very interesting, Sarah says in the chat. Maybe one more question if anyone has a last question before we let Admiral go.
Yeah, or comments or critiques.
Yeah.
You know, this is definitely work that is in progress. So.
You can also email us.
That may be, yeah, we'll have to extend the conversation over email. Well, thank you so much, Jen and Emanuel. This was great. It's really nice to enter this, this constantly shuffling stream of your thoughts. Definitely destabilizing in very good ways. Yes, so Penelope says, wonderful presentation and conversation. Thank you. I second that. Thank you so much. We're so grateful. And you're gonna have to come to Chicago. Now that we have you on the hook, we'll have to have you in Chicago soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye, everyone.